Before I get into the discussion, I want to thank Green Virgin Islands and the Glass Studio for my sets of glasses, my 4 sets of glasses. And they actually have the BVI, they're made in the BVI, they have the BVI stamp on them, and they're made from recycled beer bottles, I think, yeah. Recycled beer bottles. So it's quite a nice looking recycled beer bottle, you know. So I want to thank them for the glasses as a gift. They look nice, I appreciate it. Okay. Welcome, Jerry, Shana, Troy. Welcome to Spotlight. Good to have you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, the UK consultation. The UK, where's my documents? The UK consultation. The UK, Mr. William Hague and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the governor of these Virgin Islands, they set up a website, asked the people at the BVI for consultation to send in comments and remarks about what the type of relationship we should have with the UK government, unbeknownst to the government of the Virgin Islands. The government ain't know nothing about it.
Really?
Yeah. That's the first thing. That's the first thing that we need to say, is that they having consultation with the BVI without and going over the government's head without letting the government know that they setting up this website to go and have consultation. That's my first question. Should the UK government be coming directly to the people of the BVI to consult with them about issues like what are the main challenges facing our territory? How do you assess the quality of good governance, public financial management, and economic planning in your territory? Asking these questions to the local community over the government's head. Is that a good start for consultations?
Well, I think any discussion about this particular topic perhaps has to start at what I would term the beginning. And the beginning is, what is the relationship constitutionally and legally between the overseas territories, and I think there are some 14 of them still, and the British government. And we know, of course, in the context of the British Virgin Islands, that we are one of the overseas territories. We have a written constitution which was, in essence, negotiated with the British government, and the latest version of that came into effect in 2007. And we know from that constitution, and generally from the constitutional arrangements and relationship, that essentially the BVI government enjoys a certain level of autonomy within the framework of that constitution, and the powers of decision making within the framework of that constitution. And of course, the British government has retained, either directly through the Queen's representative, the governor, or through the British government and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, a certain responsibility in relation to certain aspects and certain important matters relating to the BVI, like, for example, external affairs, defense, and that type of thing. So we have to understand right from the get-go that our relationship with Britain is one in which, constitutionally and otherwise, Britain ultimately can exercise legal authority over us in relation to certain aspects of our functioning as a country.
Then should it be called consultation?
So the question of consultation, in the past, I am not aware that the consultation has taken the form in which this one is now taking. I think when the last white paper in 1999 was brought into effect, I think the consultations essentially went through the governments of the respective overseas territories or dependent territories as they then were. And since then, I am aware that there was one other form of consultation, in fact, in which I participated on a very short-term basis, a very short notice basis, I should say, whereby there was a meeting of the heads of the overseas territories, the annual meeting in England. And our government was asked to, in the process of reviewing the white paper, and updating the white paper, making changes to the white paper and the relationship between the overseas territory and Britain, certain recommendations were asked for. A committee was quickly put in place, and we functioned, we did our job in a very short period of time and made certain recommendations which were to be carried forward by the then Premier of the country to that meeting. We do not know what the outcome of that was. So, consultation certainly has taken a different form in the past to what has transpired now. But I think I've said enough so far. I'll let other panelists come in at this point on this issue because it is an important aspect of the problem.
Yeah. Yes, Ms. Shana.
Well, my take on it is that, as far as I know, the Office of the Governor had written to certain organizations, one of them being the People's Patriotic Alliance. So that's how we became aware of it, because we didn't hear anything as far as, let's say a government information service press release concerning, government is seeking to facilitate the process of public consultation, that this was something that the governor's office was basically pushing. And from what I noted on the website, the website is accessible by all 14 territories. So it's actually something that they are doing across the OT, where you can go on the website and see comments from the other territories as far as the same set of questions. And the level of involvement of the governments now, or the local governments, is a question indeed, as far as, taking the forefront. I think they should be taking the forefront on the ground for something like this and be supported by FCO, as far as, because I can write directly to FCO with a response. Versus writing to the governor's office or sending in something to Premier's office. So I think it needs to be better coordinated going forward based on where we're at, and with a looming deadline now basically 2 weeks away. That it doesn't give much time, because one of my concerns with the process is, does the average Virgin Islander understand the relationship, like Mr. Farrar just explained? What is the relationship that we do have? And in the little bit of research that I was even looking at, how things have changed, how we how we even got a constitution in the first instance, and what kind of powers does it give to the governor versus our local, executive branch. So those are things, as far as an education process is needed to be able to have a fruitful and a productive consultation process, I believe.
Which, how you in on this, Joy?
Let me say good evening again. From my understanding, the government was aware of the effort to have consultation done. My understanding is that it was a short notice that happened either in October or September, somewhere dropping in the middle of our electoral process during our election campaign.
Yeah, but the framework was not discussed, and as far as what I've learned, and they just went ahead and created their own framework, and what appears to be essentially going over the government's head directly to the population, which, as Jerry said before, it used to be a more where the government would have a discussion with the public, and that information would be channeled to the UK, the Foreign Commonwealth Office.
Well, that might appear to be the case in this situation. I'm just saying what I'm aware of, and from what I'm aware of, the government's knowledge of it might be. I know that a number of territories, not only us, talked about how short the notice it was. How, some people wanted more time to prepare the public, the community. I know that a number of persons were asking, territories, not only us, have been asking for more time to sensitize the public. And there seems to be no, I don't know if you want to say no latitude in terms of moving the deadlines back, so that the community could be properly educated on what exactly is being asked of them, especially if you're going to take the format that this one is taking, where they're pushing the website part of it very aggressively and basically asking the citizens directly their opinion, without the community having a chance to really publicly discuss
it, yeah.
Exactly what is necessary.
And then how do you know who these people are on the website, and how do you know that the comments that they are making sincere comments? And there's a lot that the website brings in terms of a lack of transparency of the whole process. It's like voting and not knowing how the votes are being counted.
Well, I think as Shana mentioned, the website, as I understand it, is set up, and comments are invited from people across the 14 overseas territories. I suppose if we were to, in a sense, be somewhat of a devil's advocate, there might be some people who might take the view that, well, look, I am being provided with an opportunity for me to actually have my views, my individual views on the issues made known directly to the British government through the form of this website. And I think also they are encouraging you, if you wish to actually write formally, they've given an address at the FCO office in Britain, where you can actually send in your written comments. I think an important part of this is, there are two things really. One is the very short period of time that is afforded, because if you want meaningful consultation and you want meaningful and constructive suggestions and views being put forward, you have to, on a major issue of this sort, which is conducted at least, it doesn't happen every it doesn't happen every year. This is something that happens perhaps every 12 years or more. If you want that kind of meaningful participation, whether it be from people or directly or through their respective governments, then you have to afford sufficient time for that process to take place. And an important part of that process is sensitizing the public with regard to the issues, because a lot of the people, not just in the BVI, but I would dare say in many of the overseas territories, are not really au fait with the present white paper that was put in place from 1999, right? And may not be well versed in these sort of issues. So there's a need for a process of sensitizing and educating the public in order to ensure that you have meaningful participation. This is what we had to do during the constitutional review process. There was an important initial period where we had to sensitize the public to the Constitution and what the Constitution's role and function is and its importance, in order to ensure that the kind of participation and the views that came out of that consultative process were meaningful and constructive and things which could be used and taken on board.
But the underlying issue to that for me, and a question to you, to everyone, is this a sort of a high-handed approach now being taken by the British government with all overseas territories, getting more intimately involved in the day-to-day running of their affairs, whether it's social, political, or economic, financial management, all of these things are buzzwords they keep using. The whole idea of sending your budget to the UK for approval before you bring it to the House. It seems as though we are in an era of, instead of advanced autonomy, shrinking autonomy, and this behavior regarding the discussions and the quote-unquote consultations of this process, with this process, is basically non-existent. It's not really a consultation process at all.
The concern that I have is that even if you give the best benefit of the doubt and look at the website as something modern and definitely a way that people can have direct communication, to move forward with such a issue without the public consultation, serious public consultation that Jerry was talking about, definitely makes you wonder, especially when the government is asking for more time to have the discussion. It was a short period that, it dropped during the middle of your election period. Not only our government is asking for more time, and not some of the other overseas territories are asking for more time, and so that it can be done properly. And they seem to be not willing to budge on giving you any more time and not allowing you to really have proper consultation with your citizens. And so from that perspective, it seems odd. It seems odd.
Yeah. And another thing too, in the letter, the information that's on the site, as far as the statement given by I think it was the Secretary of State of Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, William Hague, as far as the timeline, even for the publication of the next paper, they're saying it will be early next year. So it's something where, it's kind of, we've been locked into something where we don't have any flexibility, as it were. But again, it doesn't make sense to go ahead and rush something, and then when it comes back out, it still isn't, of the level of quality that you would want, because it's not reflective of the views of the people. If it is about the people saying that, this is the type of relationship we want. No, we don't want, our budget reviewed. We want to retain financial management control and have people understand exactly what does that mean, And
then the question becomes, if they won't budge on the deadline of in the next 2 weeks, the end of December, and something comes out, then who has effectively spoken for us? We would definitely be questioning information that just went onto our website, and the kind of thoroughness that needed to be done didn't happen. Who has essentially spoken for us, or who are they going to say spoke for us?
Well, there's another issue based on what William Hague has said, and he's a member of Parliament who brought a vision for the overseas territories and through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The issue of the UK setting the agenda, saying what is to be discussed. Not what we want to have discussed, not what we want our relationship to be, but their vision of a relationship for the territories. They have a vision for a relationship for the territories, and they are saying what's on the table and what's off the table. And I have to take a break now.
When we come back, I gotta interject something. I just gotta.
But why don't you do that quickly?
What came to mind was the fact, again, the level of communications even with the local government, because we've had consultative council meetings where the Premier has gone to England to discuss basically OT matters with UK. But the thing is that when there's return, there's no reporting back. So it may have been even that this has been discussed earlier in the year, but it wasn't communicated back down to the populace as far as this is what to anticipate coming up in the next couple of months.
That's right. So, but we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to just read a little part of the statement from Mr. Hague and set the stage for what we are actually supposed to be discussing. We're going to come right back with more Spotlight. You keep it locked right here. Don't move.
Spotlight is brought to you by CCT Global Communication, DataPro, Orion Law, Clarence Thomas Limited, Virgin Island Motors, and Bolo's Wholesale Cash and Carry.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Edjuenka. I'm here with Jerry Ferrara, QC from Ferrara Cairns, Shayna Smith from Smith & Associates, and Troy Christopher from JTV, and we're discussing the UK Bvi relationship and the consultative process. Now, this is a statement from Foreign Secretary. He's a Foreign Secretary.
William Hague.
Yeah,
William
Secretary
Hague.
of State for Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, William Hague. And this is what he's saying. He says, "We believe that at this point in history, in the history of our relationships with the territories, when a decade of constitutional revision is coming to a close, the time is not right to embark on further constitutional change." Now, we've been talking for a while now about constitutional review. It's been, what, 12 years? No, not that long.
No, 2007.
2007, that's about almost, this will be 5 years coming now, right? But we've been saying that we need
some improvements.
We need some improvements to make. We perhaps need to get control of the civil service. I don't know if we want to get control of police as well. We want to do some things that would make us more efficient and more effective.
Yeah.
They are saying that that's off the table. So who is the benefit from this consultation if we are not going to be able to say what it is we want? Are we just going to be discussing the relationship in the context of what their vision is?
But see, this is the thing, when you go back to coming out of from what I read, I think it was in the 99 paper, where it talked about the UK Consultative Council was created, supposedly to be one of those mechanisms to help the relationship and the communication between the OTs and the UK to be stronger. And it makes me want to know, as far as, like you're asking, who is setting the agenda? If we have these mechanisms in place, people are going to meetings and things are being discussed that aren't being disclosed, whether there are things that can be or cannot be. But that's one of those things where we would like to see more freedom of information as far as what exactly it is, because that I think in itself starts to define for us the type of relationship that we do have, because it is something where we need to be clear, the populace needs to be clear on exactly what it is that we exist in, what is it that we operate in. Because for the most part, the average person believes we have our own government, we have a constitution, and we are law unto ourselves, basically. But, as was illustrated vividly in Turks and Caicos, Parliament can convene and suspend your constitution just like that. So it is something where how we think of a constitution like the US Constitution as an independent nation, we do not have that. So we need more information as far as really the level of relationship, how much say do we have in certain things, and can we put things on the agenda like you would in a normal meeting and say, well, even if it's something that we don't follow through, and let's start the discussion, because these are things that I think we need. If you're going to ask me about good governance, I'm going to come back and say, well, maybe I need some constitutional reforms in the election process, or how the House of Assembly is structured, and those types of things that are governed by the Constitution.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a contradiction, it seems to me, in these statements, because you've just read Cromwell, where it is said in the statement that the time is not right to embark on further constitutional change. But in another part of the statement from the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, he says this, and this is a statement which I think was made to Parliament in England. We are continuing this work with a view to equipping each territory with a modern constitution. We expect these constitutions to continue to evolve and to require adjustment in the light of circumstances.
I read that too, and I thought the same thing.
So there you have it. On the one hand, it's been saying, well, look, constitutional change is off. Now, it may be that the reference to constitutional change is really more of a reference to constitutional advancement. and not ruling out that there can be changes to the Constitution, providing those changes do not result in lesser autonomy, more autonomy for the territory,
yes,
and less control from the British government.
Yes.
Right. So I think that's one of the things that they may be talking about there. But it seems to me that, you know, we can talk about the process, and we can talk about how this has come about, and that's an important consideration. It seems to me, though, that we are faced with a situation which is somewhat disconcerting, because this type of discussion concerning a new white paper is an important one, and it's going to provide the framework of the relationship or the partnership between Britain and its overseas territories for many years to come. And that something of that importance requires a very sober and deep, and I would say fairly extended period of consultation to ensure that full representation and views can be expressed by the overseas territories, either through their respective governments or also individual. If you have a website and people can send in their views, okay, so be it. So, in order for those views to be properly made and expressed and to be taken on board in the process. And then, of course, you also need, to some extent, your government has to make representations directly with Britain with regard to what that relationship and partnership should be. And
based on what their consultation with their people.
And what exactly, and what some of the issues that have come about over the last 12 years since the 1999 white paper. What are some of the issues which have come about in the practice and experience of the OTs that they would like to address and see addressed in a new partnership with the United Kingdom? So really there is I would hope, I would say this, in the end, that good sense prevails, and that the time period for consultation is extended, and that the process of consultation is one that is put in place properly, so that the views of the governments, of the OTs, and of their people can be properly represented in this process, because this is a very important exercise.
And it needs to be.
Well, unless you want to weigh on this.
No.
I'm beginning to wonder now, looking at this, right, whether there shouldn't be a consultation on the meaning of the language, on the meaning of the UK's strategy, quote unquote, strategy to ensure the constitutional arrangements work effectively to promote the best interests of the territories and of the UK. We are therefore focusing on 3 practical policies to strengthen the engagement and interaction between the UK and the territories. What does that mean?
Well,
in engagement, and in what sense? To work with territories to strengthen good governance arrangements, public financial management, and economic planning where this is necessary. What does that mean? How much interference in our internal affairs are these policy goals, these strategic policy goals, going to bring the United Kingdom government into the BVI, and to improve the quality and range of support available to the territories? I mean, you would think that as we advance as a people, that we would be looking to see what we can, how self-sustainable we can become, and then in that process of the goal of self-sustainability, look to the UK for the help that we need to strengthen us in our goal towards self-sustainability. It seems like the reverse process is taking place.
You know, it's like they have they have sat down, obviously, and have a picture in the mind of what it is we would like to see happen. And I think with the questions, it's almost as if the questions, the 6 questions that they have here are kind of like a barometer check as far as what's happening on the ground, so to speak. What's public opinion in terms of how people view, you know, the relationship with the UK? Because in the one question where they're asking about, in number 2, what are the most important areas of cooperation between your territory and the UK? You know, that points back to what it is, you know, the one policy that's talking about engagement and interaction. You know, how far are we going to go? I remember reading a comment on the website where, I don't remember which country it was, but they were talking about a level of relationship like how France has with its territories, where it's considered departments, and if you're in French territory, you're basically on French soil, you know, and whether or not that is a direction for the British OT to take. But more importantly, what are the benefits of that? Because not because somebody else has a model like that means that we must go and pick it up, because there's always going to be the advantages and disadvantages of anything. So with our relationship now, we have a certain level of autonomy given to us by our last constitution, but you know, is that all that we want as far as, again, things like support on the ground? Because one of the things that came to mind when I started to read through this is that we have a tendency to try to reinvent the wheel. So if we have the opportunity now to say we are afforded things like attachments to go into the UK civil service for all public officers, to be able to have skill development and knowledge transfer, and you know, basically at no minimum cost, to be able to come back and be a benefit, rather than saying bringing in people, you know, to perform a certain task or perform certain jobs, that we're able to benefit from those. And I think we have to take advantage of it, because truth be told, everybody has an agenda. They have an agenda, we have an agenda, but we have to make sure that our agenda is, you know, one that we're able to articulate. Because I think before the program we were talking about, we're very good at saying what we don't want, but we need to start to really think about what is it exactly do we want. Because before you can even, you know, I remember somebody coming to me during elections and was saying it's time for us to start talking about independence. And I was like, whoa, before we start talking about independence, we need to understand what our dependent relationship is right now, and what are the pros and cons of it, and what would be the pros and cons of talking about an independent relationship from, you know, changing status basically from where we are. So it is a very, you know, it's something that we want to cannot understate, that it is a very heavy discussion that has to take place.
Well, I think you make a good point in your relation, your analogy or your comparison to the French, because you know there are conventions in the United Nations that speak to decolonization, and where, you know, the United Nations no longer want metropolitan governments to have colonies anymore. Yeah. This might be the motivation behind this new relationship. We're going to follow that model where we become a United Kingdom, Virgin Islands, in the case of the French model that you compared it to, or the United States model when it comes to the United States Virgin Islands.
Departments and
that's right. Because in this statement it speaks to relationship in departmental relationships. So the wording of this statement,
it's very wide.
Is very broad.
But I think you have. I think it's important to make a comparison between the 1999 white paper and what were the matters that were emphasized, and what was the approach of the United Kingdom government towards the partnership with the overseas territories, and this particular documents, which are a precursor to a new white paper.
And some of the examples would be?
And when you look at the 1999 white paper, it spoke of a modern partnership. This was what was emphasized, a modern partnership. And one of the elements of that modern partnership was recognizing, first of all, that the overseas territories should be permitted as much autonomy as is possible in a relationship which would enable them to govern their own affairs, but at the same time recognize Britain's international responsibility in relation to those overseas territories. And one of the other elements was also recognizing the right to self-determination. Now, this particular documents which we've been reading from, which are a precursor to the white paper and a precursor to the consultation, or invites a consultation, we notice that there is none of that kind of principles and language that are informing this particular discussion. Now, we have to ask ourselves why. And it may very well be that, at least to some extent, the answer lies in two things. First of all, there is a relatively new government in Britain. And so they may have a different approach. Secondly, I suppose they would also, their new or different approach may be to some extent informed by what they see as the experience that they've had with certain overseas territories. And of course, the one that immediately comes to mind is Turks and Caicos Islands. Whereas with the 1999 white paper, one of the territories that they identified was the problem that emerged in Montserrat as a result of the volcano eruption and the continued eruptions of that volcano, and the heightened level of financial dependency on Britain that created for the population that remained on that island. But in the context of this new approach, we know that, of course, the situation in Turks and Caicos Islands was one where there were major issues, particularly issues relating to financial management or mismanagement. And that ultimately resulted in a very draconian step on the part of the British government. And that draconian step was a suspension of the Constitution to the extent whereby the British governor now is a person who's running Turks and Caicos Islands with the assistance of a committee of local persons. You know, I don't think they were elected, and the likelihood of them having elections in the next year or 2 years is fairly slim, it seems. And then, of course, we have the major economic downturn, the recession, etc., which puts added pressure on all of the overseas territories. And there may be other examples within certain overseas territories of perceived poor management of fiscal affairs that may be prompting this new exercise, and particularly this new approach to the relationship between the Britain and the overseas territories, where in essence the framework that they have set out is one which will result in a closer monitoring. And I don't want to use the word approval yet, because we're not quite sure it's going to go that far, but a closer monitoring of a number of the aspects and affairs of the overseas territories, including the issue of fiscal management, and that ties into the whole question of submitting your budget months in advance for, I don't know whether it's approval or whether some sort of nod is given to it. So I think we have to now understand, and perhaps we need to discuss to some extent
the context
in which this has arisen. And the question which was fielded at the beginning of the program as to the approach that is being taken, which is a direct approach of going to the people and saying, you tell me what you have to say, right? And
do you like your government?
Well, yes. I mean, I have seen. I mean, I think we've already seen an element of that in advance of this exercise, where governors are more proactive within the overseas territories. They are not waiting to get information from elected representatives. They are out there gathering that information themselves, informing themselves. And this may very well come back also to the Turks and Caicos experience, where people felt that the British governor may not have been as proactive in addressing that situation and addressing it early enough in order to ensure that it didn't come to what it came to.
That statement that make me suspicious. Go right ahead. Troy.
What seemed to be staring us in the face is to me the obvious, that the British has already made up their mind in terms of the approach that they're going to take with the overseas territories. You talked about the 1999 white paper. In that paper, all throughout the paper, is these phrases: territories and peoples have a right to their own, self-determination. And even within the citizenship stuff I'm reading here about how they're going to apply the citizenship, it depends on whether you want it or not. And they have found overwhelmingly across the overseas territories that we would only accept it if it is not reciprocal. If it is non-reciprocal. So throughout the territories, they have tried to preserve their own identity. For the Virgin Islands, we have a strong Virgin Islands, or we consider to be a strong Virgin Islands identity. And the United Nations, you referred to before, talked about the powers that be having to make up their minds. Either you allow your territories to determine their future, or the territories has to be, more in line with your British citizenship, and no more of the in between. And so it is presenting for the BVI a situation where we are going to have to mature, we are going to have to grow up, and we are going to have to decide, do we want to decide how much of our Virgin Islands history and characters that we keep, how much of that self-determination we keep, or do we want to become fully engaged and become part of the British? And if you look at the approach, it seems like the UK did not ask us that question. They have decided that the countries that wanted to be independent or determine their future maybe have already done so. And the countries that are dependent territories, maybe they have made a decision that it is in their interest to just slowly bring you into being British. And when you look at the policies that is being implemented in Turks and Caicos, in some of the other countries where the vision for the British is being expressed, I know one of the big issues they had in the Turks and Caicos was that the British felt that they needed to expand the population, and more British people should have been allowed to just come in, maybe another maybe another 10 or 20,000 people to come in and balance out the population. Another issue they had in the Turks and Caicos was who had a right to vote. There were some inferences where the Turks and Caicos people were standing up because the British felt that they need to widen the amount of people who vote. Maybe the British people, after coming and living in the Turks and Caicos for 3 years, should be allowed to vote, and all of those types of issues. That is their vision that they have shown in these other territories which they have engaged in. And so the question for us is, how much of that type of engagement, and do we intend to support?
Do we want self-sustainability and autonomy, or do we want to become part of the British Empire? Do we want to become part of the British Empire, or do we want to retain our Virgin Islands character and decide for the future of myself and my children and your children whether we are going to continue to carve out our own destiny and our own peace in the world, and that kind of thing? I want to read you what Mr. Haig said about that, because he made some specific reference to his vision concerning the British identity. I'm going to take a break. Right? But before I just want to say quickly that what you mentioned, Jerry, about the governor going out and gathering information, the governor taking direct involvement, it made me suspicious about the British when they sat back in the Turks and Caicos and allowed it to deteriorate to the point where it did before stepping in. I don't know how much information he would have had to gather other than sitting in the cabinet meetings every week. You understand? And seeing what is going on. It's just like the governor here also seemed to have a slack hand. I don't know, the one before this one, and possibly this one as well, seemed to have a slack hand in the financial management of this territory as well. And now here they come with the heavy-handed approach to say, well, listen, everybody got to submit their budget. Was this by design, or we just bad managers and fall into their trap? So those are some of the issues that we need to answer. But I'm going to take a break, and when I come back, I'm going to read the statement, part of the statement by Mr. William Hague concerning British identity. Keep it locked. Keep it glued right here in the spotlight while I get my tongue untied, and we'll be right back.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.
Welcome back to Spotlight. We are having a discussion about the consultation concerning the upcoming white paper, the relationship between the British and the BVI. And I wanted to, read, we talked about identity and very, very perceptive tried the whole notion that the UK wants to see its overseas territory have a more identifiable British flavor in it, because in the BVI in particular, because I think it bothers the UK that the BVI is too American.
Well, it might be too American, it might be too Virgin Islands.
It might be too, well,
we have a right to,
But that's part of our heritage when you
want to be defined.
Yeah.
So Mr. Hague said, the Secretary of State, Mr. William Hague, the overall vision is for our territories to be vibrant and flourishing communities, proudly retaining aspects of their British identity and generating wider opportunities for their people. We want to cherish the rich environmental assets. We want to cherish the rich environmental assets for which together we are responsible. The BVI and Britain are responsible for the rich environmental assets, and the British want to cherish them. And they want that we be proud of the British identity. Now, I don't know what British identity we have to be proud of. I mean, you know exactly what that British identity is that they're talking about, that we have to be proud of. Because as far as I could remember, after the Emancipation Proclamation, we were here by ourselves, clawing, our forefathers were here clawing life out of the ground. And when we claw enough life out of the ground, then we had to swim St. Thomas to make a living.
I think, Cromwell, you've touched on something.
I want to know what a British identity is.
You touched on something in terms of the history aspect, the historical aspect, because, this was, I think, very markedly illustrated in the constitutional report that we did on a particular chapter there, where it was demonstrated from a historical point of view that in the situations or the circumstances in which the British Virgin Islands made significant progress in its history, the people of the British Virgin Islands had a certain level of autonomy and played a significant role in ensuring that advancement. Because there were instances in which, of course, there was, if I may put it that way, a lack of confidence in the mother country, as Britain has been referred to, particularly in relation to Barbados, in what the territories could actually achieve. So most of the significant progress has come, and we see this historically, from the initiatives and efforts of the local people. Mark you, of course, we've benefited from the relationship with Britain, because that brings a certain international image to the territory. It brings a certain perception of stability, etc., etc. And if you look at it from the point of view of persons who wish to invest in the territory, so there are many areas in which we benefited from the British relationship. People point, for example, to the financial services industry. That one of the aspects that has benefited the financial services industry is the fact that we are still a British overseas territory, and there's a perception internationally, and perception often can be a huge thing.
But isn't that sorry for interrupting, but isn't that a more modern relationship though? Because we were under granting aid.
Yes.
And
we walked away from that.
And we walked away from there.
Yeah.
And we changed from a agricultural-based economy into a service-based economy. We began to develop, and it was the Americans who invested. It wasn't the British.
That's correct.
That invested in the tourism development.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right. And so now that we are here where we are, voila, we're looking for a British identity. Excuse me?
You don't agree with that?
I mean, I'm looking for answers here.
Well, I think, most of us see ourselves as Virgin Islanders, and we have a Virgin Islands identity. But of course, we are still a British overseas territory and have been that for many years. And that carries with it certain benefits to the territory historically. But I think the point that I was simply making is that when you look at the significant advancements of the territory, at the forefront of that was not necessarily the British government.
But we know for sure
that's a key point,
that it wasn't the British government, because the forerunners to a lot of the success that we've had have sometimes fought the British government on issues.
Correct.
And sometimes, even though the British government didn't have confidence in the territories have proven through a lot of relationships and a lot of skills of people who have gone before us have been able to come up with a very vibrant and successful territory to the surprise of those who said that only a bird sanctuary
that we only fit to be a bird
those who said that we only could be a bird sanctuary, they were a lot of they have been shocked and surprised. They've been shocked and surprised that the four parents have done so well. Some of our leaders have done so well in carving out such a promising environment and economic history.
And I think it does even the thought that comes to mind is about the whole thing of our national identity. And for us to use this juncture of discussion to really carve out who we are as a country
and where we want to go.
Exactly, because this is the
discussion we should be having.
Britain is a part of our history, but then the more important question is where we're going forward, and what is that identity that we want to have for ourselves and for the Virgin Islands moving forward, to the advantage of the people.
And not the best part of our history, I might add.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Well, we spent a lot of time, and a lot of the teachers and lecturers have spent a lot of time going through Virgin Island history. A lot of part of our historical perspective is from the Virgin Islands history, and we've tried to, for the most part, carve out a little identity in there. Sometimes, even if we reflect it back to African stuff, sometimes we reject that and we say no, it's Virgin Islands. If we say it's British, we say no, it's Virgin Islands. If we say it's US, they say no, it's Virgin Islands. So we have seemed to care about that part of it. But one of the opportunities that I think that we might be missing through this whole process and the proper discussion of all the issues is the point that you made earlier about other territories, and even within our own territory, where we have problems, as all countries have, where your financial responsibilities could have been handled better, and issues that you have within a territory could have been handled better. How do you handle that responsibility? And I'll give you an example. In the talks in Caicos, and Jerry used the word a draconian approach, there should never be a reason to suspend people's constitutional rights or the right to vote, especially for so long. Regardless of what corruption you say that you have found, there's courts and there's a system. You charge people, you let the persons go back to the polls, vote for some other people. If you figured all of them is corrupted, all 13 or whatever the number is that they had, you said they can't be allowed to run, and you elect a fresh group of people.
There are institutions in place that manage these
There is
things.
an institution in place that does that. And this is recognized all around the globe. No one allows you to decide that people don't get a chance to have a say with how they are being governed. And you know, it says a lot, especially when you have a problem with corruption. Corruption happens in every territory. It happens in every country. It happens everywhere. And that's why courts were there. That's why processes are there. The concern that I have within our own territory is that when we had a situation where, for instance, we had over the last 4 years where no audited figures were presented to the public talked about it, but they didn't have the authority to make it happen. If you looked at a higher authority than the government who was responsible for doing it, it would have been the governor. And the governor didn't seem to make it a major issue, at least publicly. And so when you look at advancement, what you want is more mechanisms that gives your territory transparency. Not transparency from the perspective that the governor needs to be the one who's doing the investigation, but you set up a commission that oversees everything that the government does. Everything in terms of advancement is ways that you can monitor your own self. If you suspect that the elected representatives are not doing well with the money,
there's a way to cause an investigation.
There is a way to cause an investigation.
Without having to beg the governor to do it.
Without having to beg the governor to do it. Yes. There should be a committee that is set up that says that whatever information, monies that is spent by elected representatives have to be published in a paper, has to be made public. So, and they have to say what it is for and what it was for. There should be an oversight committee. This is the way that other countries have grown in dealing with these problems. And the concern that I have is that I don't like the approach that, you know, if we even use the Bywater investigation where money was sent to the company and before, you know, contracts were signed, you have to go and beg the governor to decide whether he wants an investigation or he doesn't want to investigate it.
And in a dictatorial way, he makes that decision arbitrarily.
And the problem is that in a lot of these territories, it's not that the corruption or the perceived corruption isn't there and the people are not speaking out of it. It's that sometimes the governor is the one who has that authority to clear it up. But they don't do it.
Don't act.
This is one of the points that was made in the talks in Caicos, that this thing was rampant and the public themselves was trying to, you know, make a big thing about it, but we didn't have an oversight committee, we didn't have a regulatory body who could decide that we are going to cause our own investigation. This is maturity, and that's the kind of maturity that we are going to need going forward, and that's the kind of information that I'm looking for with any relationship going forward in terms of becoming more mature and understanding how do you govern yourself, how do you create transparency, how do you make sure the public is aware of everything that's happening inside government. Because those countries that you call your mother countries sometimes can be extremely corrupt as well. You see?
And that's a very important point that you've touched on there, Troy. And you know, it really, if you look again at the 1999 white paper, they speak to the issue of accountability. And some of the things that you mentioned, particularly they highlighted the functioning of the Public Accounts Committee. But we seem in the BVI to, in terms of accountability, to really put our reliance on the Public Accounts Committee. And there's a big issue as to how well that functions and how well it works, and the functioning of the auditor or the auditor general, right? While those two things are of importance, there are other systems for checks and balances, which is what really you're addressing.
That's right, that can be created.
And that can be created so that our public officials, and I use that in its broadest sense, are held accountable. The whole question of freedom of information is an important aspect. I noticed that very recently there was, I think in the speech from the throne, some mention of the new government emphasizing bringing into effect the Freedom of Information Act. Now there's a lot that's involved with that, because Britain itself has have passed the Freedom of Information Act, but the implementation of it is done in a piecemeal way, because it creates a serious burden on the country. You have to put certain systems in place to ensure that people do have access to that information and have access to it in a timely way. But there are many things that we need to look at. We have to be, in the British Virgin Islands, we have to learn to police ourselves. And this is a point that you're making, because that is maturity. You have to learn to police yourself. It is not good enough for us to say, well, that's the way it goes. We do things this way, others have done it that way, other governments have done it that way, and it's okay, let's all turn a blind eye to it. We must be self-policing. We must put those institutional things in place that would enable the checks and balances to function in a meaningful way, so that as you said, there will always be corruption, there will always be things of that nature, but there is a means of oversight and detection, and you can then take steps to ensure that these things happen, those who need to be prosecuted are prosecuted, and so on and so forth. Because if we don't do these things, we feed right into what's now happening with this consultation, right, where we may very well find that certain things may be, in a sense, dictated to us as to what must now be the new order of things between the overseas territories and Britain. Now, mark you, in the papers they say, well, some things may apply to certain territories and some may not up to others, depending on how
special circumstances.
But who makes that judgment? Who makes that decision? It seems to me that in the final analysis, the door has been opened, so to speak, and that's the unfortunate thing. And it's going to be interesting to see how this exercise is followed through and what results from it. But our original point is that it must be a meaningful exercise. It must be something where our views can be. We have our own views on what we think need to be done, and it's not enough just simply to put it on a website, because again it creates a certain there's a certain distance between the person putting it on a website and the person who's supposedly looking at it and supposed to take it into account,
and
interpretation even of that. So I think you may very well find that people in the territory here may not be very responsive to that means of consultation.
But my cynical, suspicious, conspiracy theory mind say the whole thing is a setup. So I have that.
All the more reason to mobilize.
All the more reason why we need to get involved in this thing, seize it right now before it gets out of hand.
Well, when you look on the website, there's not necessarily a lot of responses from the Virgin Islands. I don't know if some of it is published and others is not published. But again, the concern that I have is that with Virgin Islands being so opinionated and not having the opportunity to sit down and discuss such an important piece of what's going to be a framework that we are going to be moving forward with. I really think that, as Jerry said, good sense would prevail. We will clearly see what is the intention of the British, because when you use the word partnerships and they're willing to discuss these things with you, you're going to clearly know whether or not that's just words or it is their intention, when you see whether or not they allow you to discuss these things properly with your people, or it is their intention not to care whether you have discussed these things properly with your people.
Well, I want for us to go into some of the questions that they're asking.
Yes.
Right? But I think that the language in itself is so ambiguous and so general that we need to understand the language before we can make a comment.
The intent.
And this wasn't.
We need to understand the intent before we can make a comment. We can't consult with this thing here like so.
This was important in the last constitutional review, where we had to get a lot of understanding of the different terms and terminologies that they were using in belong and deemed to belong, and a whole set of other stuff like that. So to expect the average citizen, without good discussion and understanding, to go give a response and have what you want to see on a website, although the website might be offering a new way of doing it, to have it without the real nuts and bolts part of the discussion is
Let me show you. To support this process, the National Security Council also agreed that each UK government department should recognize its responsibility to engage with the territories in its area of competence
and expertise.
Each UK government got to look into the territories, into the BVI, and see what the responsibility is to engage with the territories in the areas of competence. So the CNW department in the UK got to look in the CNW department in the ministry in the BVI and see what areas they need to be dealing with.
See what areas of opportunities there are. Is when you're reading between the lines.
And each department will set out in papers by the end of 2012 how they can support the territories. So all of this language here, we have to get this language. What our ministry is going to come, or extension, or the comparable UK department. So we have to understand. We have to understand all this language, so we could decide how this relationship going to work.
Exactly.
How this marriage going to work. So we just can't go off answering these questions, and then we get to the questions. How we going to go off answering? What are the main challenges facing our territory? What are the most important?
Before you move off of one though, it's interesting that when you go on the website, they actually have this broken down into 3 bullet points. There's economic development, everyday life, and politics and government. So they ask you to comment on those 3 areas as far as what are the main challenges. And that in itself tells you they're steering the responses in a certain direction, because I might want to talk about a challenge that doesn't have any fall into any of those categories.
Well, you might want to talk about what I just talked about, setting up a independent commission to keep as a watchdog for the government in the event that some corruption is detected.
But that might fall under one of the other.
That fall under politics and government.
Let's keep rolling. So that's one. What are the main challenges facing our territory? What are the most important areas of cooperation between your territory and the UK? In what areas would you like to see greater engagement and interaction between the UK and your territory? How can the UK and your territory strengthen cooperation and build more effective partnerships? That's one question.
That's one question with several parts.
That's number 2, right? With several parts. How do you assess the quality of good governance? How do you assess the quality of good governance? Public financial management and economic planning in your territory. What are the priorities for improvement? How can the UK best work with your territory to strengthen these areas? What do you think of the quality and range of external support apart from the UK available to your territory, including from regional bodies, the Commonwealth, and the European Union? What can the UK best do to help territories access external support? What potential do you see the increased cooperation and partnership between territories? What potential do you see for increased cooperation and partnership between territories? In which areas does your territory provide support to other territories? How might this be expanded? How does your territory promote its success? What more could be done to raise your profile internationally? How can the UK best support this? So they are asking us to tell them how to achieve their goals.
But they are actually, I think they would say that they're asking you, how best can we help you?
Can we help you?
Yes.
Yeah.
How best can we help you?
Yes.
And you see that coming at the end of almost all of the 6 points that they raised there. But what I think this signals really is that there is intended to be a changed approach and relationship between the overseas territories and Britain. And whereas in the past, the overseas territories have enjoyed a certain level of autonomy and so on, it now is a vision that for the future, the workings of the overseas territories in relation to main areas are in essence going to be overseen to some extent by departments of the United Kingdom government.
They want to weave themselves right into the very fabric of our existence.
How can we help? What can we do? How can we assist you? And it seems as part of this policy, there's going to be in place a determined approach that there will be some sort of twinning between certain departments of the UK government and certain departments or ministries of the local overseas territories governments. And this is all premised on the basis of how can we help you, and secondly, how can we collectively ensure that you don't run into major problems down the road, such as, for example, that happened in Turks and Caicos. And the question for us here in the BVI is, first and foremost, is that the kind of twinning relationship that
how much involvement
we see
want
for
the UK
ourselves
in our territory?
Right.
Yes.
Is that something that we see for ourselves? I think someone mentioned early on. Is that our vision for the I think Shana mentioned for the BVI and the relationship with the United Kingdom government. And what if that is not our vision, but that is the vision of the United Kingdom government? How do we what opportunities do we have to influence the outcome of this exercise, what finally is the framework that is set out in the new white paper? And it also comes back to the whole question of identity that is important in the context of the BVI.
Autonomy.
But it comes down also in the final analysis to the whole question of finances. And at the moment, we have a certain level of autonomy. We've been able to basically, run ourselves, so to speak. We haven't been dependent upon Britain for many years for any major financial assistance. And that, I think, augured well. It spoke well for the leaders of our country in the past. But we seem to have moved into a different era, the one that is dictated by what has happened in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And the whole question of financial mismanagement and so on and so forth, and their allegations, or new premier, of course, gave an address recently on the state of the territory as far as finances were concerned, and he said it looks grim. We have $51 million of deficit or whatever it was, and so on and so forth. The approach of our government now seems to be, hot on the heels of being elected and having to go to this meeting in England, is, well, look, give us some more time.
We need to sort things out.
We need to sort things out. We need to see what's there on the ground. We need to formulate our own way forward and then make representations. And that seems to be the approach.
Well, there's an interesting approach in there where it could very well seem like everybody has to be financially responsible, and we are going to be forced to be financially responsible and all of that stuff. And some of that stuff is expected and is not unreasonable. But there's a difference between financial mismanagement and tough economic times. As you look at the UK, they themselves are going through a very, very difficult time. And the United States is having a very, very difficult time themselves. They are all talking about all the debt that they are carrying and all that kind of stuff. So looking at the territory and saying that you have debt and you have all that kind of stuff, that's typical within the environment. What you want to know is whether that debt was created by tremendously bad mismanagement, or It's just the environment of the global economy. But what I wanted to do was give on the other side, which is being used, I've heard used by this current governor himself, about the opportunities that lie within the UK for a better relationship. And that seemed like a good phrase to use it to say, well, there's an opportunity within the UK to go to school and go to college. Maybe he's observed that a lot of people have been going to the US for college, and maybe you can go to the UK to college or university. The question becomes whether this new relationship, that's going to remain optional, or in this new relationship, when we want to go to the US to study, that's something that's going to be no. Well, that's a no. You only allow
scholarships.
Only give out scholarships now to go to the UK. Yeah. And so, how much of this relationship
will be intrusive,
especially under the precept of let's recognize our Britishness more?
Yes.
Is the real interesting observation that we're going to be looking at.
Well, we have one observation. We're going to have to look at it and see what we're going to agree to and what we're not going to agree to. We're going to take a break for what from a sponsor. When we come back, we're going to open up the phones. I think we're going to get an extra half lower from the boss here. Right? We're going to open up the phones. The numbers going to come up on the screen when we come back. So we're going to take a break for what from sponsors, and hopefully we can get your participation in the discussion and hear what you have to say right after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, the Radio Doctor, Totola Concrete Limited, and Varieties and Electronics.